Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's Maynard, Mike, Matt, Craig, and Colin with the Close of Business Tuesday. We're very excited today. We're always excited down here. But, this weekend, we're all watching the news, the stuff about Russian troops getting closer to the Ukraine, what's Biden going to do, all this stuff. And we decided we've got to call our old friend, Alex Zaslavsky. Alex has been on the show with us before. He's with the Horizon Client Access Group. He's a co-founder. The company's been around since 2003. I'll do a better introduction of him, but he is a Russian expert, an author on all things Russian. He is, political risk. And I think he knows things about Putin's childhood that can explain this. The guy is so good. No, but in all seriousness, Alex, welcome back. We really appreciate you. Thanks for jumping on.
Thanks very much, mate. That's very kind of you to invite me, and thanks for the kind words. It can really go downhill from here.
No. Well, and also, Alex, the World Petroleum Congress is going on in Houston, so Alex has been over there the last couple of days, so we might pull a couple of comments out of him on that. Mike Bradley, I think you were going to give us a market update and also maybe throw in a little borscht to, give it some flavor.
Yeah, Maynard, I'm sitting here in Midland right now, and it's hot, as always. And so the other thing that's hot right now is the energy markets, right? We had a big fall last week in crude oil price because of this Omicron variant. And we obviously, though, we were going into the OPEC meeting with some concerns there. That's behind us. Crude's recovered. The markets are recovered because the Omicron does not look like it's going to be as bad. And so we've had a good little rally here, and some of these energy stocks that were down 10 or 15% have fully recovered the losses. So that's set a nice tone here. As it relates to what we're going to be doing today in regards to Russia, I think, just kind of lay it out there, who these companies are, how big they are, and what they've done so far this year. Obviously the five biggest Russian oil producers are Gazprom, which is really, really natural gas. Colin will probably talk a little bit about that because they are the predominant supplier to the EU. The next biggest is Rosneft at about 80 billion. Gazprom is about 100 billion market cap, followed by Novatek at 70 billion, Lukoil at 60 billion, and Surgat at around 20 billion. So if you look at those five companies, they make up around 350 billion in market cap, and to kind of put that into context, that would be the size of Chevron and Conoco combined would be the total market cap of those five names. And if you're looking at European oil, it's about the size of Total and BP combined. So as it relates to, the top five companies of the largest companies in the world, four of these companies are in the top 13 oil and gas producers in the world. So, they're very, very important, obviously. Just throw a couple stats at you. Year to date, Gazprom has been the best performing stock, and over the last couple of years, it's been the best performing stock. And the reason is pretty obvious. They are the biggest natural gas producer. They're most leveraged to natural gas, and gas over the last year is up 370%, the European gas price. And Gazprom's up 60%, and its peers around 25 to 30%. Now, one of the reasons why it's not a lot more is because a lot of the contracts that Russia has are fixed price type contracts, so they're not really, really participating in how things are, performing right now. And if you look at this company versus, Gazprom versus oil majors and European majors over the last year, over the last 2 and last 3 years, it too has outperformed those companies. So it's obviously, the natural gas fundamentals are benefiting it. And so some of the questions I would have, and, we'll ask them later, and I think people are starting to think about is, what are they doing right now? A lot of people think they're holding gas back. Their gas production this year to EU is pretty similar. But I think they're slow walking this thing. And in my opinion, it's given how they've got all these fixed type contracts, prices are way up. I think this sets a stage for them to basically say, okay, you know what, maybe we should move a little bit away from those fixed contracts and have some of the marketing based contracts going forward, especially if we're going to see more of this going forward. So that's kind of a background of what's going on in Russia. Very important companies. They've done very well, but Gazprom is the big heavyweight gorilla in the room, and they've done really well, and they've outperformed oil majors and outperformed European majors, and so we'll just leave it at that.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that sets a really interesting backdrop for all of this. Thanks, Mike. Matt Portillo, you've been doing a lot of marketing lately. I know you and the and the renewables team. And so what? Now that I've stolen your thunder, how's that marketing been going?
Yeah, Maynard, we were actually out in New York last week. I attended an auto presentation from Polestar with a new unveil for an EV, which was quite interesting. But on the back of that, went out marketing, and we're meeting with clients to speak on the upstream front. Our infrastructure team was also out in New York as well. One, I would say client engagement remains quite strong. Investors are very interested, especially given the pullback in the commodity for reloading into 2022. Feels like actually a lot of clients actually navigated the downturn quite well, had gross down into year end after a big run, and are actually looking to deploy more capital heading into 2022, given the fundamentals for the broader energy sector in general. Two, as it relates to crude oil specifically, while there was a bit of concern around the variant and also just what OPEC would do, quite frankly, we feel like clients are quite comfortable with the fundamentals as they stand today. And as Mike has talked about and as Colin has talked about, it looks like early data suggests that the variant may be a bit more mild, which may then ultimately not truly impact kind of the demand forecast. And as a reminder, we are forecasting demand on the research side increasing from 99 million barrels a day to about 102 million barrels a day by the end of 2022. And factoring in some of the weaker hands on the supply side within OPEC as it relates to Kuwait, Angola, and Nigeria, the market looks in fairly good shape. So on the crude front, things still seem to be quite supportive, and that continues to bolster our positive views on the equities overall. On the energy transition front, especially in the renewable power complex, just a lot of questions around supply constraints and supply chain in general, interest rate impacts to the industry, given the valuations, and then also inflationary pressures on the sector. And the team has really kind of done a lot of work to lay out our views on that front. And then lastly, just as it relates to natural gas at home, unfortunately, as we were out marketing, talking about our downside risk to 2022, we continue to see a collapse in the front end of the curve. This has really been driven by two key factors. One, weather remains very warm in winter, and that is unfortunately a surprise for supply in terms of the balances. And two, on the supply front in the U.S., we continue to see very robust numbers. We're hanging out around 96 and a half BCF a day. The Haynesville continues to surprise to the upside. And so unfortunately for natural gas, the fundamentals are heading in the wrong direction. And right now it feels like clients are continuing to put dollars to work in crude names over natural gas names. So that's something we'll continue to monitor. But again, New York in general was extremely busy. Traffic's the worst I've seen since I've been out on the road marketing. Hotels are absolutely full. So it doesn't feel like the fear that's kind of been spread in the media is necessarily translating to a loss of demand, at least on that one data point.
I mean, who'd have thought we'd cheer about New York traffic jams, but that just sounds fantastic. Craig Webster, there was you've been kind of monitoring you're a constant monitor of the ESG developments and new government initiatives and inquiries and things like that. And we've had a few more of those here recently. But now that I've also stolen your thunder, why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's more on methane. And, we've been talking about methane for a while now with the EPA proposed rules. Late last week, there was a letter sent to 10 companies, 10 Permian operators from the chairwoman of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. And, really what the letter is getting at is what are companies doing as far as leak detection and repair, but also where it's really going is what are they doing as far as innovative technologies? And, this is kind of part of the virtuous circle of ESG and policy that we see where all of a sudden we're seeing these technologies out there. Everyone's starting to taste that there might actually be something better than what we're doing right now. And so we're seeing in the EPA proposed rules and also in this letter, politicians asking about what can be done and what companies are doing right now. And so, all of this points to the fact that it's going to happen. You would think sooner than later that we're going to move from these desktop calculations to really understanding what methane emissions are and what the expectations are going to be as far as reducing them going forward.
Well, there is a lot going on. And last week, I think we touched on Elizabeth Warren had sent the letter to gas companies about exports and whether or not that was behind U.S. natural gas prices. The EQT came out with a response letter today, which is worth reading. We'll probably attach that to this blast today. Colin Fenton, we're turning the corner for home, turning the corner for Mother Russia. Before we get to Alex, what's on your mind?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Well, I have an update on natural gas, and that's a good lead in to a couple of slides. First one is a price chart against U.S. Production and consumption. It's a 20-year view. And if you look at this blue line, that's production. If you look at this kind of purple lavender line, that's consumption. Runs from 2001 to 2021. And then these two dotted lines are prices. And so a couple of observations. From about 2001 to early 2011, notice that the U.S. market was in chronic deficit. Consumption exceeded production. As we get into the shale boom, the opposite situation. Production routinely is larger than consumption. Not surprisingly, we have two very different outcomes for price. So in the pre-2011 period, we routinely see prices above $5 or $6. We rarely see that in the post-2011 period. In fact, really the only two major price spikes that we've gotten in the shale boom era involve Crimea and Winter Storm Uri. So that February 2014 geopolitical event, and then of course, Uri in February of 2021. So overall, natural gas prices were cut by 1/3 through largely this incredible increase in production. Now, I show you that just to situate the exact opposite situation in Europe. Europe went the other way in the past 20 years. Europe slashed its gas output, but not its demand. And in particular, let's break up Europe into the European Union and the rest of Europe. And if you look back to 2001, the EU was producing about 12.8 Bs a day and consuming 35.9. So it had a structural deficit, just like the United States. It was about a 23 B per day deficit, or a 64% import dependency ratio. And the rest of Europe was also in a structural deficit to the tune of about 8%. Crimea, Ukraine, 2014, we find that production in the European Union had already been on a slide. At that time, consumption was also down from where it had been, but we still had a structural deficit, both in the EU and the rest of Europe. Now, look what happened between 2014 and 2020. EU continued to decline on its production, but began creeping back up on its consumption. In fact, between 2014 and 2020, production dropped by 52% in the European Union. Gas production halved. Consumption increased by 14%. So the balance got to be almost 10 Bs a day larger. 32 billion cubic feet per day, every day on average in a calendar year, has to find its way into Europe. It's an 87% import dependency ratio, an increase of 17 percentage points from 2014. Notice the rest of Europe did not decide to pursue this path. We saw a modest increase in production between 2014 and 2020, about plus 2%, and we actually saw some attempt to rein in consumption, down about 5%. Now, it's a modest surplus, about 6% of consumption, but obviously moving in the right direction. Now, what this has done is it's really accentuated the EU's dependence on Russia. And so here you can see gas imports from Russia by pipe, 2001 through 2020, and it's gone up and down, but it's still a very chunky number, north of 15 Bs a day. You can see other imports by pipe go into Europe. And then, of course, LNG is the balance. And in particular, since 2014, we've seen LNG imports into Europe double from about 5 Bs a day to over 11 Bs per day. So just a vastly different scenario between the United States and Europe. Okay, let's bring us to where we are today. Now, we've shown this chart before in the last couple of months. So Europe has a very tenuous storage situation. We come into the winter. 21 to 22 winter is well below the normal range for stock building for injections ahead of winter. And as of December 6th, we're at about 66% full on gas in storage. And normally we would be, more in the 75 to 80% range. If we have a normal winter in terms of temperature, we'll get down somewhere in this vicinity, a critical low level relative to history. And if the system were allowed to get lower than that, perhaps on a very cold winter, we could get down to maybe 6, 7, 8% of storage in stocks and storage. So a stock out is not going to be allowed to happen. So therefore, prices must remain high. They are the regulating mechanism. Alex will tell us if he thinks Gazprom or any other entity in Russia will help solve this problem through supply. But for now, as of December 7th, we still find prices in Europe, whether we look in the Netherlands or the UK, are at about $32 per MMBTU. The Japan-Korea market price is at about 35. And here's Henry Hub, 3.66. So there's a 10x delta between the US cash price, the US market price, and what we see in the rest of the world. And let's look a little bit more deeply at what's happening there with that gas price decline that Matt was just telling us about. US prices are falling because of producer responsiveness and warm weather. In fact, it's now been 2 months of price declines on net since the 647 price that we saw on October 6th. And basically in the last 24 hours, we've gotten below the 375 level that options markets have been signaling for about 6 weeks was very likely to happen. And in fact, it has happened. And to conclude, it's for the reasons that Matt just gave us. So to give some of the specific numbers, he mentioned the Haynesville in particular. You can see growth year over year is about 1.5 Bs. And looking at the Permian, we're also seeing very strong numbers. So overall, even just from the shale gas producers, something north of 4 Bs a day of production growth. And on the demand side, every single census region is seeing warm weather. Many cases, double digits overall for the United States since September 1st. It's been about 20% warmer than normal. So you put all that together and you have a system in the United States that made the decision to allow investment in supply. And yes, did still allow demand to come up, but had a much more robust set of options for a range of scenarios. Europe has deliberately constrained its own production, done nothing on demand, made itself entirely vulnerable to imports, particularly Russian imports, and is in a very different geopolitical situation today than the United States. Back to you, man.
That was awesome. That was fantastic. What a striking difference between where North America has gone and where most of Europe's gone. Mike,
I'd like to point there too with Colin's graph. For the last 2 months, gas has come down because of the combination of warm weather and production. And this goes directly at the heart of what Elizabeth Warren's been saying, is that LNG imports, which are maxing out right now, you're seeing gas prices go down. So there is no correlation between that. If you need any real world examples, that's it. And that's probably what pushes her to just back away.
yeah, that's really going to be her launch was poorly timed in terms of trying to make her point. Well, let me, Sasha, it's great to have you. Now, see, I studied a little bit of Russian in college, so I know Alexander is your name, but for those of you who are your friends, true friends, they call you Sasha. So we're going to make the move to Sasha. But I just want to talk a little bit about Sasha's background. So he did start Horizon Client Access back in 2003. He's one of the two co-founders. He does global research for all of the company's clients. His specialization is energy politics in Russia and the former Soviet Union. Before Horizon, he was at the Eurasia Group in New York and in corporate finance at SBC Warburg. And he's the author of Power, Personalities, and Political Risk inside Russia's oil and gas industry. He's a Oxford man, and we're just delighted to have you, Sasha. So we did a lot of oil and gas, as we always do, Sasha, and then the guys put a special emphasis on Russia and European natural gas because we can't help but think that has to do with invading the Ukraine. But what do we know? What is going on? Why are we talking about this? How did we get here? Why is this happening? Just to kind of start there.
Well, Maida, thanks again for the kind introduction. I think we're talking about it because the fundamentals of the European energy market depend directly on geopolitics and on the politics of personalities. And in a lot of work we do at Horizon, focuses on personalities because this is unavoidable. When you look at energy markets, they're driven by people, they're driven by people's ambitions, idiosyncrasies, interests that are very often different from commercial developments and commercial motives. So, Michael, when you so aptly summarized the market caps of Russian oil and gas companies, it's a fantastic summary, but we also need to look at the people who run them. Surgutneftegaz is a mysterious entity without a master, apparently. Rosneft is run by Putin's close associate, Gazprom as well. So this is the kind of work that we do. Mainly, we're looking at it for a very obvious reason. There are 100,000 Russian troops stationed along Ukraine's border. This is the second time this year this is happening, and this kind of concentration of troops cannot be ignored. Part of the reason why they're there is Putin's signaling that he's unhappy with a range of things, most importantly developments in Ukraine, but also Nord Stream 2, the long-suffering pipeline that has been in progress for many years and has now been completed and now requires certification from German regulators that is forthcoming. It's a little bit delayed, but it's part of this web of conflicting interests between Russia, Ukraine, Europe, and the United States.
So Putin is a very strategic guy, obviously. So he's expressing some displeasure, but he's a strategic thinker. How does he think this is going to play out? What is it he thinks is going to happen when you kind of threaten this move and rattle people like this? How is he hoping this plays out?
It's the essence of hybrid warfare, because he loves the situation where people have to guess what he's going to do. Is he going to invade, or is it just bluff? The message is manifold, to my mind. First of all, is that he wants to send a signal to the US, Germany, France, Ukraine, that he cannot be ignored, that he is a menace, that he means business, and if he expresses interest, they need to be taken seriously. He feels that he has been ignored for quite a while. He has faced sanctions, sort of humiliating rhetoric from the West, and he is not happy with that. He has become more assertive and kind of more aggressive in terms of his stating his interests. A few days ago, he quite clearly identified the red lines. So he said that stationing Western troops in Ukraine or Ukraine joining NATO would be that red line. And he also wants to impact the governments, the new German government, the French government that is facing Emmanuel Macron facing the elections next April, and of course the new US administration. And the use of troops is one of the tools at his disposal that he finds. He cannot use economic tools that much, but he can use that.
So if this ends peacefully and he pulls the troops back, what will have happened? How will that? What are the ingredients to that playing out?
Well, to begin with, I do think it will end peacefully because he will not go over the brink. If I can make that prediction.
Okay, you're on the record, Sasha. We got you. It's not coming over.
Yeah, indeed. I think the costs of a all-out war for him far outweigh the benefits. And we can guess about his rationality or his motives. And it is true that he is obsessed with Ukraine, and he's been writing articles about Ukrainian statehood. He talks about it all the time, and a lot of it sounds, very weird.
So is his historical frame of reference as a KGB guy and all that is that Ukraine is basically part of what was the Soviet Union? So you guys are not really a separate country, and why are we? Is that the mentality he has? That's
the mentality, but given all of that, given this strange fixation that he has on Ukraine, his other motives suggest that he will not invade. What does he really want in terms of practical outcomes? He does want Nord Stream 2 to come online. He does want to re-engage with Biden. He got his call with Biden today, right? I think a lot of this build-up was about getting the call. Remember when he did the same trick with the troop deployment last April? He got a summit with Biden, right? He wants to be seen, be recognized.
So just to ask, what is his attraction to getting a phone call from Biden? I mean, I'm joking, but is Biden really? Does he feel like Biden is disrespecting him, or what? Why was
Absolutely.
that?
Absolutely, he feels
like in what way?
In a way that he and his friends have been sanctioned in a very personal way. Many of his close associates are on the SDN list. They will never be able to visit the US or have a visa card, or not that they particularly need one. But
and this is all this tit for tat stuff going on with them throwing out our diplomats, us throwing out theirs. There's been this simmering kind of thing going on. That's
one aspect. That's one aspect of it, but a much more practical economic aspect has been waves of sanctions that have been mandated by the U.S. administration through executive orders, but also congressional sanctions that have been discussed, and there are various existing laws and draft laws that envisage further sanctions on Russia. And now, what the administration is saying, the U.S. administration, very clearly, is that all of those previous sanctions will feel like child's play if Putin doesn't invade Ukraine, and something much heavier, much more robust will come out.
I think there's a tendency of all of us, who are not experts like you, to sort of assume that, the other thing that you hear about is China running a lot of unauthorized flights into Taiwan. Now the Russians have troops next to Ukraine, and it's easy to rope that into a quick little narrative, which the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan in kind of an abrupt, almost, really just unfortunate way. And to try to link all that together, that our adversaries have grown bold. But is that too simplistic and not really the right way to think about this?
I think it's spot on. I think Putin is doing that because he can. And I think the Afghan analogy is correct. If he sees that the United States does not see strategic value in Afghanistan, what business does America have in Ukraine? It's very much his argument. He would say, look at the map. Where is Ukraine and where is Washington? And now look at Russia and Ukraine. They're just right there. And he was talking about the flight time of a missile from Ukraine to Moscow. It's 7 minutes it takes for a missile to fly from Ukraine to hit Moscow. That's his thinking. So he sees the U.S. as overextended. He sees U.S. leadership as weak, vacillating, and he sees the sanctions as quite half-hearted and, frankly, not very painful to him.
To your earlier point, though, it's a weird combination, this U.S. policy towards Russia of in some ways displaying weakness, and in some ways, looking like we're less engaged with the world, but yet sanctioning him and poking him. And so it's a really sort of a strange sandwich we're making for him right now.
Absolutely right, and I think the simple reason for that is that there is no clear answer as to what to do with him. I think everybody would agree that it's not worth going to war for Ukraine, right? But on the other hand, the perception is that if you allow Putin to start with one country, his demands and his red lines will very, very quickly extend to other places. The U.S. has very strong relations traditionally with Eastern European states, like Poland and Baltic countries, and they feel vulnerable. There is a precedent of Russia invading Georgia in 2008, and under quite similar circumstances, troop deployment and then provoking the Georgians into making a mistake and then using it as a pretext to attack them. Also with the presence of little enclaves in Georgia that Russia then annexed. So kind of similar to eastern Ukraine, where with Russian aid, there is this separatist controlled territory that the Ukrainian government no longer controls. So that's the conundrum. It's very difficult to come up with a simple solution to that.
The other perspective we have as energy people is we know Russia is such an incredibly important supplier of natural gas. Europe's having a natural gas crisis and an energy crisis kind of more broadly. How does all these energy issues in Europe factor into this?
Well, in several ways. There's historic dependency that you just discussed of Europe on Russian gas in particular, and some of those issues actually date back to the 70s. Reagan was actually sanctioning pipelines from the Soviet Union to Germany. So in many ways, this is not new. But under Putin, Gazprom in particular has been used more and more as a tool of his policy. As was mentioned earlier, Gazprom has those long-term contracts and it fulfills them. Colin, I think you mentioned that they come with a time lag. Absolutely right, 6-month time lag. But Gazprom could have made so much more money selling additional volumes that it does have on the spot market, and yet Putin ordered it not to for political purposes. And this is just one example of the situation where Gazprom and other Russian oil and gas companies are basically hostages to Putin's politics. They could be so much more profitable, behave so much differently in a much more visibly more commercial way, if only they were kind of left alone and left to pursue profits. And then again, it's unavoidable to look at who actually owns these companies. That the owners or people who control them de facto are directly tied to Putin. And the fact that they're directly tied to Putin means that they're subject to US and in some cases, European sanctions. And all of this brings us back to the situation where it's a small group of people, Putin's inner circle, who run the energy show in Russia, who partner with Western firms. And by the way, they have historically been quite good partners to Western companies. Which is another interesting kind of quite complex aspect of their activity.
Good partners, you mean reliable partners, like don't transfer facts, etc.
And reliable partners and people who kind of lived up to their ends of the deals, providing Western partners with access to resources. Not the easiest, but certainly not the hardest. And an interesting aspect of that is you probably struggle to find a Western oil and gas company that lost money in Russia over the past 25 years. Even the ones who left with a profit, left with more money than with what they came. But again, it brings us back to this personal aspect in which the system is controlled.
Alex, so far we've talked mostly about gas. Could you talk a little bit about oil and what your thoughts are about Russian oil and feeding into the world?
Well, absolutely. I can tell you a little bit about Rosneft. I think Michael also mentioned that as truly the biggest state-controlled oil company, one of the biggest in the world, probably second after Aramco. In many ways, it is run as an absolute monarchy by Putin's close friend, the CEO of the company, Igor Sechin. And it's run in a quite a peculiar way because it has functioning partnerships with Western super majors like ExxonMobil and Equinor. But it also pursues projects that are very difficult to justify commercially. And it does it because of Sechin's personal ambitions and his understanding of what Putin likes and dislikes. So, for example, Rosneft's new project called Vostok Oil, which, if you read company reports, you'll see it kind of front and center everywhere. depending on the estimates, costing $150 billion or maybe $200 billion, is a brand new venture in the middle of nowhere in eastern Siberia that Sechin is building. He wants to build a brand new pipeline to the Arctic Ocean, a brand new port on the Arctic, and use the Northern Sea route to export this oil. Not far from the site of the project, there's actually an existing oil pipeline infrastructure. But because Sechin doesn't like the president of Transneft, the Russian state-controlled pipeline company, he doesn't want to use the pipelines. It's a bit of a simplification, but again, another illustration of this extraordinary role, personal rivalries and personal preferences of people who run energy assets in Russia materialized in billions of dollars worth of unnecessary investment. And you also have to think about the partnerships that potential partnership opportunities that Western firms face there. Because Rosneft has been shopping around this project for several years now. It has enlisted a couple of trading companies as partners, but no IOCs, presumably because they kind of see through the sort of glitzy presentations and see the very significant risks that this project entails.
Alex, we've covered a little bit of the tension between the U.S. and the EU and Russia. Could you talk about how China interplays on the political front in this regard as it relates to energy security and how the Chinese are approaching that market?
Indeed. Well, and it's a spot-on question, because a major result of the break with the West was Putin's decision to steer the country to China. China is now Russia's biggest trading partner, and the energy flows have been redirected to some extent. On the oil side, it's easier for simple reasons of geography. There are upstream assets in eastern Siberia. There's a pipeline that goes to eastern Siberia, to the Pacific Ocean pipeline that feeds oil to the Chinese market. On the gas side, it is a little trickier. There, the decision was made to build a brand new gas pipeline called Power of Siberia, which was a massively expensive undertaking, probably one of the most expensive pieces of pipeline real estate in the world, on terms that were, in my opinion, hugely favorable to the Chinese. So Gazprom paid for construction, paid for all the associated infrastructure, and didn't really take much of a commitment from CNPC, which is the party on the other side. So the take-or-pay commitment that CNPC has is very favorable. So the risk is pretty much all on the Russian side. Why? Well, once again, because there was a political command to build it. The command that kind of superseded even the geology, because after Gazprom built it, they realized that they didn't have enough gas from the fields that were supposed to feed the pipeline to actually fulfill whatever the commitments they took on. So now they're talking about building a second one, Power of Siberia #2, that will connect fields in the north of Russia, Western Siberia, the Yamal Peninsula, to China. If you look at the map, you'll kind of see the distance that will need to be covered. And the pipeline will transit Mongolia. So another kind of very exotic, expensive project, driven in large part by these political requirements.
Yeah, Alex, I was just thinking about going back to the oil question again. I think, in the context of OPEC plus, and some of the agreements that they've had, it seems like, back when we were talking a year plus ago that, we're right in the middle of this, ramping up production, and in Russia always sort of overproducing their quotas. And you're looking now in the last 3 or 4 months, it looks like they're kind of about where they are. Quotas are not overproducing, which kind of gets to the point of, are they now becoming a good actor, or are they bumping up against their natural ability to produce oil? I mean, can they go higher? Is there basically production, their spare capacity, what people think, and how does that play potentially on their influence within OPEC and just world oil prices in general?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. It's the latter. they're bumping against the capacity constraints, and they're very simple capacity constraints because underinvestment over the past couple of years, actually even a bit longer, means that you can't ramp it up quickly. A lot of these fields are fairly straightforward. You drill more, you increase production. You drill less, it falls. Some of them, a lot of the resource base in Russia is mature, as you know, so that requires even more investment, and there's an even bigger lag between capex and output. I think with an OPEC Plus, this is recognized. So you can see in the latest round of numbers, this constraint was taken into account, and that's that's the reality that's faced not just by Russia. One of the very clear messages at the WPC was the impact of that underinvestment globally. Actually, Nasser, the CEO of Saudi Aramco, was quite clear about it, and the fact that globally in the industry, capex has declined by more than 50% over the last few years, suggests very very clear implications for the coming years.
Alex, when we from the U.S. perspective, we sort of watch the dynamic of what's going on in Europe with Russia and their energy dependency on them, and it's a little bit perplexing to those of us who are at a distance. How does that dynamic work in the EU? Who is the voice of the EU? Who is the conversation between when it comes to Russia and the EU? Is it Germany, or is it a conflicted group that doesn't necessarily speak with one voice?
Well, it's a bit of each. It's definitely Germany that is the main, it's a dominant power in the EU in all other respects, but it's also the biggest market for Russian gas. And also historically, the country dating back to the Soviet era that looked for ways to find opportunities for dialogue with the Soviet Union and now Russia, even if one might dislike some aspects of Russia's behavior. For reasons of geography, we now have this collection of states between Russia and Germany after the Soviet Union broke up in particular. So Putin has always was looking for ways to bypass those transit states, and in particular Ukraine. Hence the decision to build, again, a very expensive subsea pipeline along the Baltic Sea shelf, Nord Stream 1, and then another parallel pipeline, Nord Stream 2, 110 BCM in capacity, at the time when there's enormous amounts of spare pipeline capacity that Russia could utilize, but running through those transit countries, and in particular Ukraine. The German approach has been commercial, I think. Russia is an extremely important trading partner for Germany. There are lots of German businesses, not just in the energy sector, but across the board in Russia. Russia historically supplied, as you know, the bulk of German energy needs. German companies like Wintershall have done extremely well in Russia through their partnerships with Gazprom. And when the Kremlin is offering you a free pipeline, it's kind of difficult to say no. Sure, the Ukrainians and the Poles might dislike it, but at the end of the day, the German government's view, and I think this is going to be the view of the new government as well as Angela Merkel's government, is that you have to trade, and you have to try to overcome those political disagreements and keep business on. So, and that's the tension. The really kind of interesting part of it was the role of Washington, because as you know, Nord Stream 2 has been kicked about in the U.S. Congress for a while, and under Trump, some suggestions were made that it might be sanctioned by the Trump administration. One issue that the German government really dislikes is American intervention. Yes, they might object to Putin's approach, but they hate it even more when when the US government tells them what to do and what not to do with Putin. So that's another sort of, area of tension. At the end of the day, I think Nord Stream 2 will be certified, gas will begin flowing. Actually, it might begin flowing even before it's certified. So that commercial approach will dominate.
So Alex, that gets to the point of kind of deliberate intentions versus unpredictable outcomes. And we have seen a lot of policy, especially during the COVID period, be very deliberate, whether you agree with it or not. All of us, I'm sure, have our views in any country or whatever. But now we're starting to see things that were clearly not planned. And I'm thinking of the property company Evergrande in China, which could lead to some sort of cascading effect on the demand side in China. We've also seen this remarkable move in the Turkish lira. And anybody who remembers the 1997-98 period, the Thai baht toppled first, and then eventually it wound its way into Russia by 1998, but all emerging markets were linked. And so the question is, how worried are you about the demand side in energy markets? And when you see the Turkish lira have this incredible move, are you seeing anything in Russia that would be kind of a warning side for all of the businesses of the companies who are listening to this call?
Probably not, Colin. I think it's a great question. I think the degree of contagion that Russia faces is now very different from the late 1990s, from the Asian financial crisis. For better or worse, Russia is less integrated with the West. It's more connected to China. Sure, there can be a shock from the Chinese side, but in terms of just simple kind of monetary and fiscal balance, Russian position is actually not bad at all. There are hundreds of billions of currency reserves. Putin has survived the pandemic very well, even though the toll on the population has been terrible. Politically, he doesn't really face a challenge from within. So I would say that the biggest risk is not that of economic contagion, but of something going terribly wrong in terms of unintended circumstances, in terms of potential clash in Ukraine and the break from that direction. The Biden administration is threatening to disconnect Russia from the SWIFT payment system, for instance. That's going to be kind of a hit in the solar plexus, which will be very difficult to ignore.
I think we look. We're all intrigued by this. As you say, it's got every flavor of sort of political gamesmanship and economics and personality, and it's like a good 19th century Russian novel. If you're like, who has the most at stake here? Obviously, the Ukrainians. You don't want to get invaded. If you're the Russians, you launch over that border. You've really become a super bad boy, and that's going to set off a lot of problems. But if you're the U.S., it's one more thing that has gone wrong and looks like a world that is coming apart at the seams. So who has the most at stake here? Who should blink, I guess, is what I'm asking, to avoid some sort of unintended, to Colin's point, an unintended catastrophe.
Well, I think on the European side, stakes are high. I mean, at the end of the day, the US kind of is removed from that conflict, and in case a hot war does start in Ukraine, it will be there. And so,
did the Europeans worry at some point? Well, if he could do that, he could do Poland. I mean, did they think like that, or how do they think about where the limits are?
Well, it's a slippery slope, because Putin had already invaded one country, Georgia, right? And what we saw in the aftermath was President Sarkozy of France, flying to Moscow and trying to mediate, right? So it was not met with universal resistance. Of course, there were condemnations, but not very practical implications for Putin. This time around, Putin has a lot to lose. Russian revolutions started in the past through adventurous wars abroad that didn't go as well as they were planned, and leading to discontent at home, leading to regime change at home. And, that kind of war, by the way, is very unpopular. The prospect of that war is very unpopular in Russia today.
So there's no big spike in his polls going on.
Not at all. I think people have other priorities. They're economic, they're social, they're fed up with Ukraine. Ukraine has been really used and abused by Russian propaganda over the past 7 years, nonstop. Every time you switch a TV set, there it's all Ukraine, and I think it's been really far too much. So Putin knows that. I think occasionally I see First World War analogies, and one of Colin's questions was about unintended consequences, and the First World War was like that. It started as a result of the several unintended steps that led to the war, even though nobody really needed it. And I think today the situation is very different because Putin sees the implications much more clearly. He understands the cost. He's fond of history, and he knows that if he goes over the brink, he will be at risk. He will be the one who can, at the end of the day, lose power. Certainly will incur a lot of immediate costs that are completely unnecessary. So that's why, again, at the end of the day, I think he might go to the brink, but not over it.
You have this strange impression that he thinks this is fun. Why wouldn't I put some troops next to the border? I mean, I didn't send him over. Everybody just relax. And, I don't know. Maybe that's ridiculous, but.
I think you're right. He's been at it for 21 years, and I think that's something which we briefly discussed last time I was here. And, you have the same job for 21 years. People sing you praises all day long for 21 years. Of course, you're bored, right? So,
well, in 21 years, you get Craig would tell us you get a good corporate governance problem. The board is not as independent. Exactly. It's not as much influence.
Exactly.
Well, Sasha, it's fascinating. What should we watch for? Just this is going to keep playing out. What's the one thing you would tell us all? Watch for this action, or watch for this move, or watch for this tea leaf.
Well, today and tomorrow, I'd watch the comments from the White House and from the Kremlin about today's call, and there are sort of hints of conciliation that I noticed when I was, getting ready for our conversation today and read the news about the call. So it doesn't seem to be especially hostile. Next few days, I would watch for signs of shooting in eastern Ukraine, because that would be a sort of precursor to a larger operation. Putin would use this as a pretext that the Russian troops are attacked and have to respond if he decides to do that.
I think one thing that tends to weigh on all of us is the world has become so unpredictable in the last couple of years that you tend to think these improbable things have a higher chance of happening than maybe they do. And so I found your discussion here, it's reassuring that maybe this is not going to happen, but we're all hopeful.
There's such a plethora of apocalyptic analysis out there. I'm glad that I put an optimistic spin on it.
That's right. That's our tagline. Russia, we're going to put an optimistic spin on this Ukraine deal. Anyway, thanks so much, Sasha. Thanks to all of you. Thanks, team. We'll see you next week.